She thought her words would silence him. One sentence, dripping with hate, hurled across a crowded street meant to wound, meant to humiliate. People froze, unsure whether to look away or lean in closer. But what happened next would not only shock everyone who witnessed it would ignite a moment no one would ever forget. Because sometimes the loudest voices of hate crumble in the face of quiet strength. And in this moment, one man turned pain into power. But how? Marcus was the kind of man who blended into the rhythm of everyday life. A teacher, a mentor, a neighbor everyone knew by name. His days were simple morning coffee, long hours at the local high school, and evening walks home through the same streets he had trusted for years. He carried himself with quiet dignity, never seeking attention, never expecting trouble. But on this day, something felt different. The air was heavy, the crowd restless. Unseen eyes followed him, judgment lingered in whispers. He didn't know it yet, but the safety of his routine was about to shatter, and one cruel voice would turn an ordinary evening into a defining moment. Marcus moved through the plaza, the hum of evening chatter surrounding him. He had walked this path countless times, but tonight the energy was different, thicker, unsettled. A group lingered by the fountain, their laughter sharp, cutting through the air. At first, he thought nothing of it. But then, from the crowd, a voice rose loud, mocking, aimed directly at him. Words he had heard before, but never this venomous, never this public. Go back to Africa. The sentence sliced through the noise, leaving the square in stunned silence. People turned. Some gasped, some looked away, others pulled out their phones. Marcus felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on him. His chest tightened, not from fear, but from the sting of humiliation. He had taught his students about resilience, about dignity in the face of cruelty. But in this moment, standing exposed before strangers, the lesson felt impossible to live. The woman who had shouted stood firm, arms crossed, her face twisted with a smug satisfaction. She wanted a reaction, wanted him small, broken, ashamed. And for a flicker of a second, Marcus thought of walking away, swallowing the insult, burying the pain like so many times before. But something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every moment he had been made to feel less, every silent compromise demanded of him, every injustice swallowed to keep the peace. The crowd leaned in, waiting. Some whispered, urging him to leave. Others muttered under their breath, anger building, but held back by fear of becoming targets themselves. The square seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the seconds between insult and response. And then she doubled down. Another remark, harsher, uglier, dripping with entitlement. Marcus could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he did not move. Not yet. He looked at her, calm but unyielding, his silence cutting deeper than any outburst could. The pause was unbearable, every second stretching, daring him to respond. The plaza had become a stage, and he was being forced into a role he never asked for. Still, he knew this moment mattered. How he chose to stand or not stand would echo far beyond this night. And with the crowd watching, with every phone recording, Marcus prepared to answer hate in a way no one expected. The silence around Marcus cracked like glass when he finally stepped forward. Every eye followed him, every phone lifted higher, the crowd pulsing with anticipation. He stood tall, his shadow stretching beneath the harsh plaza lights, and for the first time, the woman's smirk faltered. She had expected rage, shouting, maybe even a fight. What she didn't expect was stillness, controlled, deliberate, unshaken. Then, with a steady voice that carried through the air, Marcus began to speak. His words weren't frantic. They weren't loud, but they struck like lightning. He reminded everyone of a truth too often ignored, that people who looked like him had built the ground she stood on, had shed blood for the freedoms she took for granted, had endured centuries of hate and still stood unbroken. His voice grew stronger, fueled not by anger, but by history, by dignity, by every injustice endured in silence. The woman tried to cut him off, tossing another insult into the air. But the crowd had shifted. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't silent observers. They were listening. And in that moment, the power she thought she held slipped from her grasp. Every word Marcus spoke was a mirror, reflecting her cruelty back at her, stripping away the illusion of superiority she had clung to. The plaza buzzed with energy, the tension breaking not with violence, but with truth. Strangers nodded, some even clapped softly, others simply watched with tears in their eyes. The insult meant to diminish him had become the spark for something larger, a raw, undeniable moment of resistance. Marcus's final words cut through the night like a blade. I am here. I belong. and nothing you say will ever change that. And with that, the square erupted. When the noise finally faded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus stood in the same place where the insult had been hurled. But he was not the same man. The sting of hatred was still there. Yes, but so was something else. The undeniable proof that dignity can be louder than cruelty. And that truth, when spoken with courage, can shift the atmosphere of an entire crowd. The woman who had sought to humiliate him walked away diminished, her power stripped not by force, but by the strength of his presence. Marcus went home that night carrying more than the weight of a single encounter. He carried the knowledge that his response had become a moment people would remember, a story that would be told again and again. And yet, for every Marcus, there are countless others whose voices are silenced, whose pain goes unseen, whose stories never reach the light. That is the deeper wound of racism. It is not just in one insult shouted in public, but in the countless ways it lingers, generation after generation. This incident wasn't just about one man standing tall in the face of hate. It was a reflection of something larger, something woven into the fabric of society. And it leaves us with a question that can't be ignored. How many more times must people prove their worth, their right to belong, before hate finally loses its voice? Because in the end, silence only protects the oppressor. But when truth is spoken, when dignity refuses to bow, it forces the world to look in the mirror. And the only real question left is, will we finally face what we see?